So today I'm just trying to continue a conversation that those of us who were here at the start of last year might remember. I spoke then about how RP fits into an Augustinian school, or why, if you like, it's critical to an Augustinian educator to know something about working restoratively. I said then the key image of justice for Augustine was right relationships. Rightly ordered relationships. When we are rightly ordered with ourselves, with others, and with God, then we're living a just existence. That was key to our understanding of Augustine's vision of justice. It also challenges us, I think, RP challenges us to work with our colleagues and our students and our parents in a way that touches the very heart of the Augustinian charism. Gary McCloskey, former professor of Augustinian pedagogy at Merrimack University, says that if there's one word that describes the Augustinian charism, it's with. That the Jesuits are men for others, that other orders have different charisms, but the Augustinians are men with others. That they travel with and encourage that community ideal more than perhaps many charisms do. After that initial introduction at the start of last year, I put on a workshop that I entitled RP in the Augustinian School, and 12 of us struggled with this in a little bit more detail. I had a major thesis that RP as an educative philosophy actually enables us to live out the gospel values that we talk about, and it enables us to give flesh to the Augustinian values. So that it's a vehicle, it's not an end, it's a vehicle for us to live the mission that we're called to work with and to embody in our schools. I went a little further in that and theorised that restorative practices is actually a vehicle for us to provide a formation in Catholic theology and in Augustinian thought. That it's the way in which we can promote the key values that belong under both of those umbrellas. As a result of that workshop, I wrote a paper, as I tend to do, and entitled it Right Relationships, Restorative Practices in an Augustinian Catholic School. So that's the conversation we were having last year in large and small groups. I started off with these two Augustinian quotes, and this is my thesis for today, summed up in the first two lines of these two quotes. The first subject students learn is the teacher. That's been morphed in educational circles to the old adage that boys learn teachers, not subjects. Augustine said the first subject students learn is the teacher. And here I include all of our support staff. Every adult in a school is a teacher, regardless of whether you teach in a classroom or not. Every adult in a school impacts on the development of the students in that school. The second one, which is an exhortation to teach that students may become their own teacher. So the first one, we recognise that we are here, as Mark said, as role models, but more importantly, we're here to facilitate, to enable the kids to no longer need us. So I've entitled today's presentation, Because We're Teachers. And I mean that in the broadest possible sense. You may have seen this before. If a child doesn't know something, the Courier Mail and other organs of society tell us we need to teach them. But if they don't know how to behave, or how to be honest, or how to get along with others, or how to be considerate and thoughtful, then they tell us we should punish him. that that will affect change, when in fact we know that it doesn't affect change. The best definition I have ever found of pedagogy is this one from a journal in 2003, that what we do in schools, in the broadest possible sense, what we do in schools is reasoned moral human interaction within a reflective, educative context. The little ellipsis there takes out all the socio-political constructivism and so on, but reasoned moral human interaction within a reflective, educative context that facilitates the acquisition of new knowledge, beliefs or skills. I like the addition of beliefs in there. It's knowledge, beliefs and skills. But it's the first four words that I find most challenging. Our work in schools is human interaction. It's the connection between two, basically, flawed but hopefully genuine human beings. It's moral because all work involving people has a moral dimension. Moral not only in the students' choices, but in our choices in how we go about the work. There is a clear moral dimension. We can do things right, or we can not do them. And it's reasoned. It's a reasoned interaction. Okay? We spend a lot of time on the reasoned interaction to facilitate the new knowledge, beliefs or skills. We plan it out, we define things, we teach them, we correct, we challenge, we inspire, we help them learn to do it the right way. Put that in a nutshell, we try to maintain high expectations of our students while at the same time scaffolding the work so that they can progress. If you look at that in the two-dimensional grid in terms of expectations and support, then you know, as a teacher, if you walk into a classroom with high expectations but you're not prepared to help, the kids are going to be lost. Okay, you can expect the world, but if you haven't provided the scaffolding, if you haven't provided the instruction, if you haven't provided the steps, the kids are lost. Similarly, if you walk into a classroom low on expectations but really want to care and support the kids, then you know they're not going to achieve much. Kids rise to the level of our expectations. If you're low on expectations and you don't really provide the scaffolding, it might be period 6 on a Friday afternoon, or you might just be neglecting the work. We all know that to achieve the best out of our kids academically, we need to be very high on expectations, but we also need to be able to scaffold and support the kids in their learning. I know you can do this with the right effort on your part and with some help from me when you need it. We know we all try to work in that top right-hand corner in every class. We all try to work in that top right-hand corner when we're supervising the tuck shop. We try to have high expectations and we try to provide the support and the means. When we're serving in the tuck shop, or the schoolwear shop, or the front counter. Whenever we encourage kids to step up, we're trying to work in that top right-hand corner. But what more do we want for the kids than just pure academic success? If you look in the documents and the website, if you look at the Catholic school system, there's a whole lot of qualities that we want to instill in kids beyond knowledge. If we look at our mission statement, it's replete with them. I want to pull out 6 words. In the first line it says, education is the formation of the whole person. In an educational tradition that we're part of, a profound educational tradition that we're part of, the Augustinian tradition, this comes down to 4 dimensions. This is a document that Mike Morahan and I worked on with some South American educators in 2009. That an Augustinian education involves body, mind, heart and spirit. 4 different types of intelligence. A large number of capabilities. We're developing memory, intellect, physical and social capabilities, will, emotional capabilities, a sense of wonder and of reflection. And that the 4 Augustinian key values that I talk about all the time, humility, interiority, community and a search for truth, support and fit with those 4 dimensions of education. Humility and interiority link heart, mind and spirit. Community and the search for truth bring together heart, mind and body. Now take that with the quote from Augustine at the start, that students learn the teacher. Puts us in a very demanding position. People have heard me quote Bruce Perry before. He's a neuroscientist and psychiatrist who works primarily in the area of trauma for children and recovery from trauma. He points out quite clearly that we pass on attitudes, beliefs and skills not only intentionally, but also in unintentional ways. Intentionally, we spend a lot of time over this side of the diagram. And sometimes we hope that unintentionally the rest of the picture gets filled in. But he says, humans become humane. We have a genetic heritage. Okay? We're the only animal on the planet with the capacity that our prefrontal cortex gives us for morality, for judgment, for decision making, for compassion, for empathy, for all of those qualities. We have that biological capacity. But it's only a biological capacity until we learn how to be empathetic, compassionate, and caring. In the same way that we have the biological genetic capacity for language, but 20,000 years ago, that biological capacity for written language wasn't expressed until written language was invented. And now we teach kids written language at an incredibly young age, and they learn it. The capacity has been there for thousands of years. Just like the capacity for us to be fully human and fully compassionate and empathetic and caring is there, but it's only there if we learn how to. Because our brains will only form the appropriate connections if we learn and experience that emotion in our relationships with others. Perry says it's patterned, repetitive, neuronal activity that causes us to learn things. We know in the cognitive realm that if we want to learn something, it's repetition. Repetition causes the neurons to actually connect differently. Okay? Perry has a great video showing 2 neurons coming together to form a synapse. And he makes the point that this could be where the word dog, the sound of the word dog, and the visual image of the dog actually become connected in the brain. That every time we learn something, new synapses are connecting. They're happening in this room at the moment. They're just not happening at the rate that they do, for example, in the first few years of life. We slow down a lot. But it's happening now, or we would not learn anything new. In terms of the qualities beyond the academic, Perry says, it's only through that repetitive neuronal activity in relating to developmentally mature individuals that this learning occurs. In other words, it takes a village to raise a child. Vygotsky. There's a blast from the past. Most of us probably haven't heard of Vygotsky since we were in uni. Vygotsky is the theorist of the zone of proximal development. And over 80 years ago, he wrote that social interaction is the basis for cognitive and emotional growth. Now, Vygotsky wrote in Russian. A lot of the early translations dropped all of the emotional work out of Vygotsky's writings. And it's only in the last 30 years that the full text of his writings has been translated well into English. Vygotsky says what the child is able to do in collaboration today with a more developmentally mature adult, he'll be able to do independently tomorrow. That's the key of the zone of proximal development. There's what the learner can currently do, there's what the learner can't yet do, and in the middle is what the learner can do with assistance. Now, when I first encountered this, I was taught to look at this in terms of tasks. That this represents what the kid can currently do, this represents what he can't do, and these are the tasks that we work on with them. That's not Vygotsky's point. He didn't call it the zone of proximal tasks. He called it the zone of proximal development. He said that there's a region, there's a fluidity, and he's saying this 80 years ago before the current neuroscience revolution. Vygotsky's saying there's a fluidity in the student's development that they carry along, and that's where we can impact on how they think, feel, and act. That orange region is in the middle is what the learner can do and with guidance and encouragement from a developmentally mature adult. So for Perry and Vygotsky and other theorists, it comes back to this. The basic transaction within a school like ours is that one. A developmentally mature person, or a more developmentally mature person, interacting with a young person. And it's that interaction, it's that direct interaction in which learning occurs, learning in its broadest possible sense. It's also in that interaction where a lot of physiology occurs. When we have a positive interaction with another human being, for which we're hardwired, by the way, we're hardwired to recognise faces, we're hardwired to connect with other members of our species. When a positive interaction occurs, it is regulating. When we say hello to somebody in the morning, when we acknowledge them on the corridor, when we say hello in the staff room, it's regulating. The higher parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and so on, says to the amygdala and the lizard brain, calm down, it's okay, things are good. Hormones are released which actually make our heart work better, our pancreas work better, make us less liable to be diabetic, and a whole lot of physiological processes are triggered by interaction with another human being. If we look at the development of the young person, humans become humane by an enormous series of these interactions. It is all the interactions over many, many years that results in our grade 12 student being able to stand here and speak with eloquence and compassion and love. However, things have changed. This is a not-to-scale graph of the decrease in the size of households from 10,000 BC to 16 years ago. The point is that biologically we are made to live in clans, groups, multi-generational and multi-family groups, probably of about 40 or 60, such that the ratio of developmentally mature adults to children is 4:1. Biologically, that's how we best develop. The inventions we've made and the choices we've made as a species over thousands of years have meant that we're now not living in multi-family and multi-generational groups as much. So the choices that we make as a species have an impact that Perry says our evolution is not keeping up with our choices. Our evolution is not keeping up with our technology. Today, he says, the typical American 18-year-old in a typical loving family, okay, so this is not foster kid or anything like that. He's a typical 18-year-old in a typical loving family who watches the typical amount of television and has the typical bedroom on his own and the typical amount of screen time in a day will, by the age of 18, have had the same number of social emotional learning opportunities that 3 decades ago was typical of a child of age 6. If you just count the human interactions that the young person has had as a measure of what sort of emotional and social learning they have had, and you could look at that in spiritual terms, you could look at that in academic terms, you could look at that in any of the 4 dimensions of our holistic education. The number of interactions they've had with another human being is typical now of what would have happened 30 years ago for a child of age 6. So he says we're putting out, and I don't think the Australian situation is that much different from the American one in this case. We're putting out 18-year-olds with the cognitive skills of an 18-year-old, but the emotional, social skills of a 6-year-old. Might be an extreme statement, but I think we get the point. Okay? It's great for kids to have their own room, but it's also great for kids to have to share. You know? And the choices we make as a group, as a society and as a species, we're not fully grasping the consequences. Okay? For a kid to have his own room might be a great thing. For a kid to have his own room with a TV in it might be a great thing. And a mobile phone and an iPad might be a great thing. But the consequences might be that it's disrespecting our biology. And our biology can't be disrespected for long. Perry concludes, it's as important for us to think intentionally and deliberately about creating social, emotional, relationally enriched curriculum as it is to talk about STEM. In fact, he says, I'd argue it's more essential that we develop intentional opportunities for relational enrichment in the lives of our children in order to express their potential. The biological capability is there. It's in the brain. It's hardwired at birth. What happens after that determines their potential. And what happens after that is a series of one-on-one interactions with more developmentally mature individuals. John Hattie, who's familiar with John Hattie's work, Visible Learning? John Hattie is the guru of the mega study. There's 2 at the moment. Bob Marzano is one. We'll talk about him later on. John Hattie's the other. Okay? Mega meta studies where they take studies involving thousands of schools, thousands of studies, millions of students. And John Hattie in particular is famous for this list on the right-hand side, which I'm surprised you can't read, of what he calls effect sizes, or what are known as effect sizes. In other words, things that you can do that have an effect on academic achievement. And if we look at the very top of that list, the one that Hattie talks about a lot is the quality of feedback. Now that's a relational thing, but that's not my interest here. It has an effect size of 0.73. Basically anything above 0.4, Hattie concludes, is worth doing because the average effect size of any intervention in education is about 0.4 in his study. So if you can get more than 0.4, you're getting more bang for your buck in terms of the effort you're putting into reform. So he's written rather extensively on feedback. But if you look at there at 0.72, teacher-student relationships is as important as feedback. And if you look just slightly above, classroom behaviour beats both of them in terms of impact on academic outcomes. So we do all this when we're designing a unit to teach a kid how to solve a physics problem. What about if we applied the same rigorous, sophisticated approach to developing the full human potential across all 4 dimensions? What about if we applied the same rigorous approach to social and emotional dimensions? Not just in a social and emotional program, but in each of our classrooms. Dealing in developmentally appropriate ways with conflict and wrongdoing. And creating a school-wide environment in which our students would not just thrive, but flourish. I know you're wondering when I'm going to get to RP. It's now. When we look at the needs of students, we have traditionally looked at Maslow's hierarchy, needs of human beings. Physiological needs and safety and security come first. Then above that, belonging and significance and self-actualisation is where Maslow stopped. I think our experience in our climate puts a top on the pyramid and says beyond self-actualisation is actually a sense of purpose, which is reflected in our parts of the motto for the senior school. Does this situation, do I have the opportunity to connect with something greater than myself? Am I concerned about the common good? To get to the second of Augustine's quotes, that we should teach such that students may become their own teacher. In other words, how do we do this in a way that encourages the development of students to think for themselves? Pope Francis gave me a great line last week in the Apostolic Exhortation. We are called to form consciences, not to replace them. He's referring to the rules and so on around marriage and what have you, but it applies here as well. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to form consciences so that kids don't need us. Not control them with rules so that they don't have to think. In fact, it's old. It goes back to Aristotle, practical wisdom. He said practical wisdom, the key to the development of the character of a person consists of 2 skills, moral skill and moral will. The ability to discern the right thing to do, to work out what is the right thing to do in this situation, and then the ability to choose that right thing to do. We can challenge students and ourselves to be the very best that they can be through RP. Just briefly, what is it? For those who haven't encountered it before, it's an alternative way of viewing conflict and wrongdoing from the current prevalent way of looking at conflict and wrongdoing. So it's countercultural. For us, it has 2 qualities that appealed to us when we first explored it, and that is intentionality. It talks about explicit practice. If you want to know what you do, why you do it, and how you know it works, then you're working with explicit practice. And it has alignment, it's congruent with our values as a Catholic school and as an Augustinian school. Fundamentally, the traditional approach to dealing with wrongdoing and conflict in schools was borrowed from the criminal justice system, the adversarial system, and 3 questions are asked. What rule was broken, who's responsible, and what do they deserve? That's a simplistic view of it, clearly, but in a nutshell, that's the prevailing approach to dealing with wrongdoing in schools. The restorative approach simply asks different questions. What happened? What harm has been done, and to whom? And what can we do to address the harm? Restorative Practices says that the first thing that's most important when something goes wrong, the first thing that's most important is who's hurting and what can we do to help? So that becomes the guiding principle. Because it recognises that all of our work in schools is about relationships. As I've said before, it's moral work, it's also emotional work. We don't go home at the end of a day feeling terrible because something cognitive in our classes didn't go well. We go home feeling terrible because something emotionally went wrong, or we have an emotional reaction to what happened. It's emotional work because it's two people, you and the student, interacting. And we interact and we live in the emotional realm. And it's not just relationships in terms of behaviour management, it's relationships in the classroom. It's relationships in the staff room. And it's relationships with the parents that we work with. But relationships are at the centre. If we're trying to build a community in our classroom or in our school, then we build it one relationship at a time. Augustine says teachers and students should have their dwelling in one another. He simply means we need to live in relationship with others. So if we go back to our two-dimensional scheme that we had at the start when we were looking at teaching, and we look at expectations versus support and care, but we look at it in terms of the relationships we might form, then if we have high expectations of the other person in a relationship, but don't really care or nurture that relationship, then we work in what we call the punitive corner. We do things to people to get them to do things. And we treat kids in that context as objects to control. If, on the other hand, we're very low on expectations, we take a therapeutic approach, or what we call a permissive approach. It's not your fault, let me sort it out for you. Then we treat kids there as objects of need. If we don't have high expectations and don't really provide much nurture, then we're ignoring them. But if, on the other hand, we have high expectations, in other words, to borrow Mark's phrase, we want kids to be the best that they can be. We want ourselves, we want our colleagues to be the best that we can be. And we're prepared to help them out to be that. Then we're working up here in the restorative corner, or working with people as subjects to engage rather than objects to control, ignore, or as objects of need. So the traditional approach to behaviour management in schools was, of course, the top left-hand corner, the punitive one. It's all about you doing what I say. The opposite end of the spectrum is the bottom right, which is it's all about me taking care of you. In the top right-hand corner where we're trying to work, it's all about us working together. So you and I working together with our students to make sure that we all have the opportunity to be the best that we can be. It's the corner of unconditional love. No matter what you do or say, I'm still going to expect you to be the best you can be, and I'm going to help you be it. If the term unconditional love makes you uneasy, use the psychological jargon, unconditional positive regard. Okay? But that's where we're trying to work, in the corner that we would refer to as unconditional love. I'm not a parent, but parents tell me this is just being a parent. The underlying belief in RP is that those who are most directly affected are best placed to solve something. They just often need a little bit of help to work together to solve it. And it's also true, I believe, that most wrongdoing and conflict is emotionally driven. Issues of respect and disrespect drives most wrongdoing and conflict. And most harm is emotional harm as well. What RP provides is a process for us to use which helps to metabolise that negative emotion and turn it into something more useful. So what categorises a restorative process over any other? Well, RP brings together people who have been affected, and it recognises who's been affected and how much, in what ways. Tries to identify what needs to happen in order to repair the harm and to enable the group to work out how to put things right as much as they can. It's trying to reach accountability. Now, in the traditional scheme of things, accountability is constructed usually as the wrongdoer getting their just desserts. And this is what the Courier Mail screams for whenever there's some sort of misbehaviour in schools or young people or bikies or whatever, that people get their just desserts. I would like to put out to you that I believe genuine accountability is a bit more complex than that. And I think genuine accountability involves these factors: understanding the human consequences of what you've done, facing up to what one has done and to whom one has done it, taking responsibility for the results of your behaviour, helping decide how to make things right, and taking steps to repair the damage. Now, there may be a penalty involved in there somewhere, but these are the characteristics of accountability, and I didn't know how I was going to explain this until I saw David Pocock's apology. And other people saw David Pocock's apology and commented on the fact that it was so odd. His apology shows Sporting World how to say sorry properly. In the text of the other one there, in a refreshing departure from the usual sorry, not sorry sentiments often trundled out by redemption-seeking sports stars. Have a look at the apology. Can you read it? No? Yesterday I faced the judiciary for the first time in my rugby career. I'm incredibly disappointed with my actions. I endeavour to play the game I love in a way that reflects the kind of toughness and decency I think rugby can teach us. On Saturday night I did not live up to these standards, placing Michael Leach in danger by binding on his neck in a maul. It was not my intention to hurt Michael, but in these sorts of circumstances it is not intention that matters. I am grateful that World Rugby and SANZAR are concerned about making the game safer for all of us. I would like to take this opportunity to apologise again to Michael and to apologise to the Chiefs, Brumbies and all those who follow rugby. I'd also like to apologise to my teammates who I will let down over the next few weeks while suspended. So he's been to the judiciary, he's got the penalty, but he's recognised that accountability doesn't stop with the penalty, that it's got those characteristics. And the media recognise that this is something out of the ordinary. We know that this is what we want, I believe. In a general audience last month, the month before, forgotten his name, Pope Francis said, I won't try and explain that. He says, such legal justice doesn't conquer evil, it just stems its tide. He's been reading criminology. Penalties don't stop wrong behaviour. They might achieve compliance, they usually just suppress it. They certainly don't achieve the conversion of heart that we're looking for in our development in the 4 dimensions. I'd like to finish off. I'm going to move to a task, a little exercise that I'd like you to do for 5 minutes, but hence the tables and the pens, in case you were wondering. I just wanted to finish this section with a description of the fundamental principles of restorative justice as enunciated by an American Jesuit by the name of Kurt Denk. he says the four principles, and you can see this echoed in Francis's statements this year and last year as well. The first principle is that relationships precede rules, that people precede rules. And it's people and relationships that are most important. Secondly, that justice should be by participation, not proxy. So those affected need to be involved, not adversarial justice. Thirdly, what Juanita was talking about there, that we're seeking the restoration of wounded communities, not just adjudication of wrongdoing, but we're seeking restoration, healing. And the fourth one needs a bit of explanation. He says the restorative justice continuum from order to rehabilitation to shalom. He says communities ideally desire not simply order, okay, not simply compliance with, you have police forces in society for that, to try and promote compliance with the law. So we don't just want compliance, we don't want order. Above that, societies strove to have the penitent rehabilitated, hence the original reason for the name penitentiary, that the prison was a place for people to be rehabilitated. He says not even just the rehabilitation or treatment of its ill members, but a deeper and more constitutive peace. He talks about a well-being of relationships that actually feeds relational growth. That is, we deal with wrongdoing and fractured relationships so well that it actually feeds relational growth. That our community builds stronger relationships out of the damage. He describes that as the biblical concept of shalom. I couldn't help but picture the Japanese art of kintsugi with this, which deals with broken pottery. Now in the West, if we broke a pot, we'd throw it out or we'd invisibly mend it so that it tries to restore what it was before. The Japanese art of kintsugi restores the pot but highlights the crack with precious metals of silver or gold, in the belief that the pot is more beautiful because of its history, that it's more beautiful because it's mended, that it's more attractive because it has a character. And to me, that's a visual image that Restorative Practices tries to achieve in communities. A fundamental uprightness and well-being of relationships that actually feeds relational growth. It's a process, it's a lived reality. It's what Vygotsky back at the start would call perishavanya, a lived reality of emotional life. It's a little like what Francis talks about pastors being, having the smell of the sheep, working with people. So we operate restoratively by having high expectations and providing high levels of support and treating every incident as a teachable moment. We have lots of teachable moments in a day, and most of them we focus on relate to content, skills. My encouragement to you is to see our relationships with our students in that same continuous phase, and that each teachable moment is just an instant in that relationship. So how we respond to conflict or wrongdoing in this instant today is in the history of how we've done it with this student before, and it's in the future of how we're going to do it with this student later. And it's all of those personal interactions, one after the other, that gives what Perry says is humans becoming humane. Separating the problem from the person is a key aspect of restorative practices. And that leads us into the little exercise I have for us to finish with today. We know that there is a spectrum of restorative action, from the very formal end, the community conference, which most of us probably won't be involved in, down to the very informal end of what we do on a day-to-day basis, what we call the affective statements and affective questions. And I have a little task that looks at the affective statements. What are we trying to do in any restorative intervention? We're trying to have a difficult discussion that needs to occur with the aim of repairing some harm or teaching something. to challenge students to think towards the other, not about themselves. I think it's C.S. Lewis says that, I'm going to stuff this up, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And that's what Augustinian humility is about. Considering the other. To educate towards practical wisdom, moral will and moral skill. Knowing what the right thing to do is and being able to choose it. So that fundamental, Denk's fundamental at rightness of relationships that feeds relational growth or peris humans becoming humane. I'd like to focus on the affective statements. An affective statement engages students and challenges them to think of others' needs and important values, okay? It builds emotional intelligence and encourages empathy development. It communicates expectations and expresses care. And it humanises ourselves because we're putting ourselves in the position of expressing emotion. And it builds a relationship. What we say is going to have an impact. Think of that diagram of the young kid and the older person talking. What we say, day in, day out, in the little insignificant moments, has an impact on the kids. We may as well try and make that impact positive, even if the situation itself is negative. And that's what we're aiming to do with affective statements. So, if a kid is talking when I'm talking in my classroom, I could say, Bill, don't disrupt me when I'm speaking. I'm really working in the top left-hand corner of our social discipline window, doing things to kids so that he changes his behaviour. I'm using blaming language. Don't disrupt. Don't say don't talk. Don't disrupt. It's judgmental. It's blaming. It's accusative. Okay? This is not what I'm suggesting we do. If we take it as an okay affective statement, we might say instead, well, Bill, would you mind listening when I'm speaking? On a good day, we might say, please. Okay. If we want to ratchet that up a bit, we might involve some exposure of our own emotion. A better affective statement might express feelings about the behaviour that are specific to and are specific about its impact on others. Bill, I'm frustrated when you continue to talk while I'm speaking to the class, as it distracts everyone. Okay, I'm frustrated, it gives some emotion. Your speaking to the class describes the behaviour. As it distracts everyone, points to a higher value, points to others' needs. So that might be a little bit better. What might be better still is if we specifically describe the offending behaviour, express our feelings respectfully, describe the impact on others, and encourage more positive behaviour. Okay? Now, I'm not proposing this in the middle of a sentence while you're talking to the class. I'm proposing this as a quiet conversation with a student on their way out of the class. Bill, when you continue to talk while I'm speaking to the class, I feel frustrated because it distracts others. And I need you all to understand what I'm saying. Would you mind focusing when I'm speaking with the class, please? Okay. It's actually stealing from nonviolent communication theory, a structure called OFNR, observations, feelings, needs, and request. Start with an observation free of judgment. Express how you feel. Explain the impact or the needs or the values you're trying to serve, and then make a simple request. Promote the more positive choice. Okay? Are you going to do this 10 times in a period? No. Okay? But we might be able to do it a little bit more sometimes. Now, on the back of the sheet, just half jokingly, I've written an affective statement standard schema for us, where we can grade a statement against a particular outcome. Right? So if, I forgot who it was, is it Bill? Bill's talking, an E standard response might be to ignore the behaviour, but in fact, ignoring the behaviour might be the strategy that's warranted at that particular instant. A D standard response might be, my Bill, for God's sake, shut up. Or it could involve using blaming language. And C, B and A are the three examples I just gave you. Now, we could obviously aim more often than not for a C or above. I think that's achievable. Okay? Not on a Friday afternoon, period 6, but any other period maybe. It's achievable to aim for a C or above. Okay? What I'd like you to do for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, is with your guy next to you, just have a look at the 5 examples. Sorry, I cut one out. 4 examples on that page, and see if you can structure something with the OFNR structure: observations, feelings, needs and values, and a request. Or just take one and try it. Okay? Hence the pen. Hence the space under the little statement. All I'm encouraging us to do there is to be conscious in those little moments. And it's in the little moments, I suppose, that we're more inclined to think less about what we say and give less care to what we say. Just sometimes in those little moments, if we give a little bit more thought to what we say, those personal interactions, that reasoned, moral, human interaction that occurs between us and the students, might have a more lasting positive impact. So, I just wish to summarise what I've tried to convey this morning, this afternoon. Restorative Practices is an educative philosophy which enables the building, nurturing and repair of relationships. It gives us the means to respond to incidents of conflict and wrongdoing. It helps us develop authentic community within our classrooms, and it enables us to help form the whole person, which is right at the start of our mission statement, that education is the formation of the whole person. That's why I think we do restorative practices, because we're teachers. And that's why it makes sense to us. It's not easy. The opportunity we have to be an exemplary restorative practices school is one I think we should grasp. Not because it would make us exemplary, but because of the impact we could have on our students and ourselves.